Everything we do here is above board, trying to make sure that we safeguard information. In this point, those folks who were leaking, who have been pushed out of the building, are now attempting to leak and sabotage the president's agenda and what we're doing. And that's unfortunate. It's not what I do. It's not how we operate. And so you've got another allegation being pushed again, not based on how we're operating around here. We're for the warfighters. We're for the president. And none of this is based in reality.
Pete Hegseth should be fired. Period. Full stop. Bobby Jones here with Midas Touch Network and Valor Media. The clip you just saw is a man who is desperately trying to hold on to his job. A job that is amongst the most important jobs on the planet. A job that goes back over 200 years. A job that has literally helped shape the modern world as we know it. And in that clip, you saw someone who not only knows he's way in over his head and underqualified, but he also has done the one thing leaders that are bad do, and that is never take accountability or responsibilities for his actions. In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the office that Pete Hegseth currently occupies, the Secretary of Defense, where it comes from, what it's done in the past, why it's important. And then I'm going to show you exactly why he should be fired based on the job description that secretaries of defense have had to live up to over the 200-year history plus of the United States of America. So let's talk about the origins of the role of Secretary of Defense. It was stood up in 1789 to coincide with the implementation of the United States Constitution, the election of our first president, George Washington, and a general by the name of Henry Knox, one of General Washington's most trusted generals and advisors, assumed that role. In the beginning, it was solely focused mostly on the Army because the United States at that time did not have maritime ambitions. They were just trying to maintain the territories they had fought to gain from the British. In 1798, the Department of the Navy created its own Secretary of the Navy, Benjamin Stoddard being the first one, to break apart the land and sea component, because the United States at that time was getting involved in the Barbary pirates and the war that took place over trade, merchants being impressed into service for other nations by the British, etc. So you had a Secretary of War and then a Secretary of the Navy. And this pretty much was the standard for the next almost 100 years. The American Civil War, they maintained this. They continued to push into this, even as America became more global in scope, especially after the Spanish-American War at the end of the 19th century. So as we move into the 20th century and the world wars presented themselves, these roles were still pretty much solid in place. And it wasn't until 1947, after World War II concluded, and we saw the dysfunction between the different branches of service, the chain of command, who was in charge of what, that the United States decided to completely reorganize the War Department. It went from being the War Department, and then in 1949 became the Department of Defense with a unified military leadership. But in 1947, the National Security Act created the Secretary of Defense role, a civilian that was in charge of the entire military, and the different branches reported to that civilian authority. James Forrestal was the first person to hold that role post the 1947 National Security Act. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, in 1949, the War Department became the Department of Defense. The role of Secretary of Defense, or SecDef as we say in the military, has become so important. A lot of other jobs and responsibilities have kind of crept in as the world has changed. The United States military is used many times in humanitarian aid and disaster relief operations. So they'll work with FEMA, they'll work with Homeland Security, they'll work with cybersecurity and civilian agencies like CIA, NSA, etc. to respond to these threats. They have to maintain, the Secretary of Defense has to maintain the civil military balance to keep institutional integrity on the up and up. And most importantly, they have to have a sense for what's happening with their actual force, the people, the civilians, the families, to help balance readiness, requirements in order to meet mission. It's not as cut and dry as one may imagine. It's not a science, it's more of an art. And in order for that art to be executed properly, there's a certain level of experience and exposure that the Secretary of Defense needs to have.
There's not enough men like me who do whatever they want.
Are you sick of it yet?
Those people need to be, when we take power, they need to be given the death penalty.
The anger.
I live like a capitalist every single day, Cenk. I live as a capitalist.
The hate.
And we have a system of checks and balances. That's a good one. That's really funny. We do?
The idea that to be a man, you have to be a bully. Fuck you! We should be better than this.
Females don't have independent thought. They don't come up with anything.
Our kids deserve better than this.
It's like women want equal rights when it's convenient, but then they still want the door open for them.
So help us change it. Subscribe to Valor Media Network, where you can find shows on sports, men's health, and patriotism without the resentment and division.
True strength is about discipline, resilience, and service.
If you've wondered where all the positive role models are, especially for young men, check out Navy SEAL Dan Barkoff and Commander Bobby Jones as they share stories of service and sacrifice.
Being good at being a man is about what you do for others and not what you do for yourself.
Listen to Jason Tander and co-hosts Ravi Gupta and Adisu Demisi give you the inside track on the politics of sports.
I just want to take back what I said about the Bills. No, because in all honesty, your team seems to have gotten the vaccination thing right. Okay. My team seems to be struggling with it.
These shows and many more from Valor Media Network prove that you don't have to be an asshole to connect with young men today. Subscribe to Valor Media Network today.
On the international stage, the SecDef has to be able to build and maintain alliances such as NATO and AUKUS, international alliances that help maintain stability worldwide. They are also the face of American power projection and American deterrence. They are usually the mouthpiece for the President of the United States and for American allies, where when they speak, people listen and people trust what they say. So as you can see, the Secretary of Defense is vital not only to American security, but global stability. The SecDef influences war, peace, alliances, national defense posture. Their decisions directly affect the lives of over 2 million service men and women and their families. And when you have a poor leader in that position, it will erode those alliances, demoralize the troops, bring more stress and harm to service member families, and most importantly, the trust to build future alliances, the trust to believe when America says something, it means it, goes out of the window. So with that brief history being laid out, let's talk about Pete Hegseth. Let's talk a little bit about his background and his confirmation appointment, and then what has happened since. So for those that don't know, Pete Hegseth was a former National Guard officer. He was a major, and when he got out, he became a Fox News host, primarily Fox and Friends weekends. Okay, he was very adamant in defending Trump during Trump's first administration, and he continued to do that even when Trump was out of office. Apparently, Donald Trump really loved the way he projected himself, the way he looked, the way he carried himself, and he was nominated for the role of Secretary of Defense in 2025. Okay, no prior senior military leadership experience. Okay, no defense policy leadership experience. Nothing about him said high-level leadership at the Pentagon. However, his confirmation happened 51-50 with the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, breaking the tie. His confirmation hearings were contentious because it was blatantly obvious to unbiased lookers that he was not qualified for the job. Those that voted for him said that President Trump was entitled to have anybody he wanted to implement his policies with the Department of Defense. Well, he had multiple personal red flags, from his alleged affairs to his alleged assaults to his alleged drunkenness to his mismanagement of funds for not one but two nonprofit organizations. So the things that you look for most: integrity, leading other people, fiduciary responsibilities. He failed at those various things throughout his career, but he was confirmed 51-50. Once the United States Senate confirmed him for the position of Secretary of Defense, we began to see immediately the implementation of President Trump and Secretary Hegseth's vision. First, the firings of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the chief of naval operations, the lead JAGs for all branches of service. That was one heck of a way to start things off. And then on top of that, the elimination of up to almost 5,000 civilian positions within the Department of Defense, which they deemed as unnecessary. Okay, then here, because of the recent Signalgate scandals, which I'll get to in a second, you have the senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense being removed, the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Secretary of Defense removed, the Deputy Chief of Staff to the Deputy Secretary of the Chief of Staff, as well as Joe Casper, the reassigned Chief of Staff to the Secretary of Defense. So within 3 months, we've seen almost double digits in senior Pentagon officials removed by Peter Hegseth, half of which he has selected for those roles. Why? Well, let's talk about that. Signalgate shows us how unqualified and not serious Pete Hegseth is in the role of Secretary of Defense. He took real-time, classified, operational and tactical data and passed it on a third-party app on non-secure platforms like his personal cell phone. Think about that for a second. On top of that, we found out about the group of pretty much need to know people that would be in that group, even though he put that information out in the wrong platform, with the exception of the journalist from The Atlantic. Then we find out later he does the same thing, only this time it's in a chat group with his wife, his brother, and his personal lawyer. Let me just give you a brief overview of what classified material means. For you to have access to it, not only do you have to have the security background check, you also have this thing called a need to know. You have to have a reasonable reason that you get to learn about that information. Pete Hegseth's wife has no business with that information. She has no role, and we're still trying to see if she has proper security clearance to even be around that kind of information. His brother, not on a need to know. His personal attorney, who he brought back to the military to help shape the JAG Corps based on the people they fired from the JAG Corps, no need to know those operational things. So he put people in danger. The information could have been intercepted. We don't know. And then, because they fired all the inspectors general when he came into office, we're not even sure we're going to get a proper investigation, which should terrify everybody. On top of everything I just mentioned as far as operational and personnel decisions, the culture wars that he's fighting as well. The removal of what they classify as DEI content, which is really military history, the reversal of transgender policies all of a sudden, the possible use of Department of Defense on domestic soil for border enforcement, heck, even the removal of traditional Pentagon press briefings. And this is a guy that came from the media. All of these things are creating an environment where there's little to no trust, and most importantly, little to no faith in the competency of the top man for the most powerful military in the world. He needs to be fired today.